So, hi Kate, thank you very much for agreeing to have a chat with me today.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Okay, so I think it would be good to start with a point that has come up recently, and then we'll go through some other questions that people might have. I understand that you might not be able to give definitive answers at the minute, but we can discuss those topics anyway. So the first kind of point that I'd like to talk about is obviously the 80% of average wages, which will be covered by, for the furloughed workers and the coronavirus job retention scheme. It won't include tips, trunk or service charge, which is something new that's kind of started being discussed over the past couple of days. So maybe you could talk a bit about that and explain where we are with that and why so many people need that.
Okay, so I think there's an awful lot of uncertainty around all of this, and it's one of the areas where it's a good job that I can say the government hasn't been definitive on any of this at the moment, because although they've come out and said tips are excluded and anything that's discretionary is excluded, they have also made clear that if it's a regular guaranteed monthly minimum earning above your salary, that is capable of being considered and included. And then yesterday we had a very strange reference that came out saying tips paid through tronc are excluded. And that's led everybody to assume that means tronc is automatically excluded and service charge is automatically excluded. I don't think that's the case. We're continuing to push the Treasury to give us the certainty and clarity to be able to advise members. But I go back to what the guidance said on Saturday when it was released, which is if you've got evidence that there's a regular monthly payment, that there's an element of contract or obligation to pay that, and you can demonstrate that, then you are able to include it because that's an earning. So I think that there is still scope for companies to look at their internal arrangements, to work out, particularly around service charge, how they are making that payment and to continue to include that. The reason it's so important is that for the certain parts of the sector that use it, and it's by no means universal, but for those parts of the sector that use it, it makes up a significant proportion of an employee's take-home pay. And the intention of the furlough scheme was to guarantee a minimum level of income to those workers who would otherwise have lost their jobs as a result of coronavirus had the government not stepped in. Now, it cannot be right, and it cannot be the government's intention that they are going to make workers in the sector, some of whom are in the lower paid category, lose up to half of their take-home pay simply because they've got a legal understanding or a misunderstanding about what tips, service charge and gratuities are, and you've got officials who are conflating all three of them when in law, tips, service charge and gratuities are totally different. So I think it is important, if it's not for the businesses, it's for the workers and the employees within the sector who deserve to have their average earnings protected, carried forward and paid to them, rather than having to rely on universal credit, which is the alternative that they are going to have to rely on and which the government was so keen to avoid. So we're fighting here not for the businesses, but for the workers and to make sure they get the pay.
So, I mean, it's a worrying time as it is, and then there was a little bit of relief from that, and then now there's this again. So there's another feeling of uncertainty, and like you said, obviously this is ongoing, and you will clarify to everybody as soon as you have an answer.
Yeah,
I suppose it's quite case by case as well for this as well. It's not specific, that you can't, it's not a broad topic, is it?
I think that the way the government's moved, and they have moved over the course of the last 2 weeks, once you've had political statements, you've then had it translated by officials, and it has been a moving feast. And I think what they failed to realise at an official level is the nature of the difference between all of those different ways of paying people, but also the fact that these people are paid on a weekly basis. You can't simply turn around to somebody who's paid normally on a weekly basis and say, oh, by the way, because the government is doing a new scheme, we're not going to pay you for 5 weeks, which is what would have happened if you wait until the end of April. So for most of the businesses that the government is dealing with, they are going to make a payment probably the end of April, probably at the same time as the monthly payroll. So those businesses are not having a cash flow balance. Whereas in our sector, where workers need to have that weekly payment made, you're asking businesses to take a gamble on very uncertain and unclear government advice. So I think we have to look at what was the spirit of the intention of the scheme, and what's the goodwill that we're trying to carry forward, because this is going to be retrospectively audited by HMRC. Nobody's going to do the check in advance. So those businesses need to provide the reassurance to their teams and to give an answer to the teams about how much they're going to get paid.
Yeah, and sticking with the scheme, I have a, it's a question that everybody is asking is, when am I going to get this money into the business so that I can pay people? I don't know if you have any more clarity on that. It's one of them that is, oh, maybe it'll be this point and then it's this point, or so I don't know if you can clarify that a little bit more for us.
Well, we've just had an email from HMRC that says the scheme will be open and the portal will be open on the 20th of April. Okay. That will be a simple mechanism. That's not having to upload vast amounts of data. That is simply telling HMRC, this is my PAYE reference number. This is my bank account details, so you can pay me directly. And here is the total gross amount that I am claiming for staff salaries, employer NIC and pension contributions. So you're not going to have to go through in advance and do something complicated to upload all of your workers. That suggests that they will meet the deadline of paying people and getting the money into bank accounts by the 25th of April at the latest. So, I think government quite often will talk about end of April or talk in generic terms around spring. In this instance, the Chancellor is really acutely aware how important hitting that deadline is. Everything else has been cast aside to be able to prioritise that. That means that we don't always have all the answers to all the minutiae of how this will work, because they're so focused on getting that deadline hit. So I'm confident, having seen the date today that the portal will open on the 20th, that we will have money in the bank accounts of businesses to pay their staff by the end of month payroll date, 25th of April.
Which will be a huge relief for people, because I think that's all they want, is they just want to know what they're doing and what's happening.
Yeah, and as I say, the calculation will be simple. Do your due diligence now, calculate how much you are doing as a gross total amount. And my principle that I've applied when I'm advising all of our members is seek forgiveness, not permission. So make the promises now, look at how you can calculate your average salary, provide your due diligence, your audit trail for people who've been taken on, make your claim, and then be prepared to justify it afterwards, but don't worry too much about getting all the minutiae correct. As long as you've got a good justification afterwards as to why you've made the decisions you've made, I think there is going to be an understanding that people have made these decisions in haste, in advance of government guidance coming out, and in the case of hospitality, have had to make payments in advance to people because they're paid weekly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously this date is great, but for some people it isn't soon enough. There have already been casualties within the industry, small businesses, big businesses. Mark Hicks, for example, was yesterday or the day before, was the closure and administrators. So how many casualties do you think? I mean, I know it's a bit how long is a piece of string, but do you realistically think that the hospitality industry is, going to suffer? And how many do you think we can expect?
I don't think we're going to get through this unscathed. Sadly, I don't think that the Mark Hickses, the Carluccios that we've already seen are the last. And I think that the challenge will really come when we start to reopen and we start to have that gradual lifting of social distancing restrictions, because we were first into the crisis. We started to get hit in terms of revenue and footfall in February. We will be last out because it will take a long time for consumer confidence to return and for people to get used to that habit of going back out again. And obviously, with a large number of job losses across the rest of the economy, but also workers who are on furlough and receiving far less pay than they would normally be used to, you face an issue where there's less disposable income to go round. So I think that will be the challenging time when we move away from the social distancing restrictions and go through quite a challenging period up until September, October, before the economy starts moving again. And I think undoubtedly it will take 18 months. If you look back at some of the crises that we've gone through as an industry in terms of the financial crash, in terms of previous recessions or economic shocks, it takes an 18 months for that full flow to go through. So I think, yes, there will be some more immediate administrations. The challenge is cash flow. The challenge is very real for those who are in leasehold properties. where they've got rents to pay and a looming amount of debt building up. And clearly the other challenge that we've had, despite the Chancellor's good announcements, the money from the loans has not been flowing through to our sector. So there have been eligibility checks that are too high a hurdle for our businesses to overcome. So I think there you've got businesses that are literally running on empty, trying their hardest to support their teams and waiting, and the money is always going to come too late to play catch up. So I think you will see further casualties, and there will be more blood on the high street, unfortunately.
Which is a really terrifying prospect for everyone within the industry, and not just the industry. Obviously, they employ so many people, it creates so much money. It's going to be a huge effect on the overall economy. So it's quite a terrifying prospect.
It is, and I think what we've seen through the coronavirus crisis is how vital our industry is to communities and to society and to the sort of cultural identity of UK PLC. So yes, we're important economically, third largest employer, 3.2 million people working in the sector, 130 billion pounds worth of revenue. But actually what people are missing is that social interaction and that sort of neighbourhood or community socialising space that hospitality businesses provide. And we have been the biggest regenerator of town centres and high streets communities over the last decade. So we need to make sure that our industry is in a robust enough state to be able to come out and play our part in the bounce back. That means that government needs support and to continue to provide meaningful support for our businesses rather than it just sort of coming to an end. The rest of the economy and offices might be able to stand straight back up. It will take us a lot longer. So we need that tapered support so we can continue to play our part. But I do take heart from the fact that we are one of the most resilient industries around, that we have come through really previously, whether that's terrorism attacks that have had an impact on global travel and tourism, whether that's community downturns, whether that's local high street downturns, and the financial crash of 2008, and that we are dynamic and innovative and entrepreneurial. So I know that we will come through this, but it will be a leaner sector than we've had previously. And unfortunately, the fact that we will have trimmed will have been good businesses that were otherwise viable, not just those that were failing.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about the government and the support. I think the worry is that if we don't get the support, and that the damage will be irreparable. So is that that's a real worry for people. So do you, in your opinion, is the government doing enough? I mean, obviously there's not just our sector, they are trying to support everybody. So in your opinion, are they doing enough, and will they continue to do that?
I think there's always more that they can do, but I think the government has put in place a really comprehensive package of measures to support the economy as a whole. I think they were very clear at the front end of this that hospitality, tourism, travel, leisure were bearing the brunt of the coronavirus crisis, were the most acutely in distress and needed the real support. Since then, it's broadened and the whole of the economy has jumped into furlough and needing support through loans. I think the government needs to do more, and it needs to do it for longer. So the hospitality grants are great, but they are only directed at the very smallest properties, not the smallest businesses. So we need changes there to make sure that everybody gets that access to the emergency cash funding. The loans are brilliant, but again, the eligibility criteria excludes vast swathes of hospitality. And I think the key issue for the next 6 months is going to be around rents, and it's going to be about debt repayment, and therefore they do need to provide that support. So what we urgently need is something to address the conundrum of how do you pay rents when you've got no cash and you're physically closed. And I think in terms of furlough, that support needs to continue until we are fully out of the social distancing measures, because I think the signals that were given by government yesterday and today is that those closure measures will continue, and then there will be a gradual lifting. So we've heard Switzerland, Holland, Austria all talking about gradually lifting their social restrictions from about the middle of May, but that will be progressively done. So you will free up people's personal lives, but then necessarily the social lives won't all kick in, and so our businesses won't necessarily be open. And while we are only trading for part of a period, we need continued support to furlough those workers. So I think government will pick up and continue to listen again once they've got through the intense period of this public health crisis, and they've stabilised the economy.
Within the hospitality industry, there's a lot of different bodies representing a lot of different areas of the industry. As a staff canteen, we just wondered what you thought about whether there should be a hospitality minister or just one voice that you know is feeding in, rather than, because I'm sure it is, you know, awful hearing it, but I'm sure you get it as well, all different angles, everyone's got different worries. I don't know what going forward, maybe that's something that could be put in place. I don't know if you think that's helpful or something that can be done.
I think from my point of view, from lobbying the government, the real areas of power in government are the Treasury, Number 10, and the Cabinet Office. And you're never going to have a hospitality minister in any of those. So we have a tourism minister in Department of Culture, Media and Support. We have a food minister, and we have ministers in bays who look after high street hospitality. I actually think it works to our advantage to have 3 people putting pressure on the Treasury to do the right thing and represent our sector than it does to have just one minister with overall responsibility, but you know, still only having one person knocking on the door of the Treasury. Because ultimately all of these things come back to the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. You know, he's the one who determines about the amount of cash support. If he's got it in the ear from 4 different ministers, that's better than just having one person. You know, if you work with government, they always work in numbers, and they look at responses to consultations and the weight of the post bag. The single biggest thing that we can do is to, as an industry, deploy the fact that we have a presence in every single constituency. We can write to every single MP and tell them the loans aren't getting through, the finance grants aren't getting through, you need to do more to support hospitality and tourism, or the economy in this village is going to collapse. That's what we need to be doing. And then you've got 650 people putting pressure on 4 ministers and straight through to the Treasury. So you've got to have that bullseye at the centre of the dartboard, but you know, you've got points of influence around him. So to me, it's better to have 4 or 5 of them than just one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure people will be very happy to hear that, because I think sometimes you feel like you're saying things and maybe you're not getting the answers that you want, and
yeah,
in terms of that.
But as an immediate step, as part of the coronavirus crisis, when they realised, because we were working so closely with them since January around what was happening on tourism and global travel, and what were the likelihood of it happening. I mean, in January, everybody thought it might be able to be isolated, and then it rapidly became apparent it was going to hit the whole economy. But that stood us in good stead, because we were talking to the relevant ministers about this deluge that was going to hit. They have immediately stood up a new team within Bays of 6 people that are just looking at restaurants and high street hospitality. So you know, you've always had a small team, but 6 additional people to be just looking at what we're doing. You've got a new team on commercial leases and rents in the Department for Housing and Local Government. And you've got the existing team in DCMS that were looking at hotels and catering and tourism. So, you know, you've suddenly had this mushrooming effect. There's no way Whitehall is going to go back to normal. So having those additional resources pumped in, they're suddenly aware of how important and how much the economy relies on hospitality going forward. I think it's a real game changer in the way that our industry is viewed. And I think it's fantastic that when the Chancellor was talking about this in the budget on the 11th of March, before most people had thought about coronavirus, he mentioned hospitality non-stop, about so important to make sure that hospitality succeeds, so important to the economy, and recognising that contribution. And equally, you know, the jobs that our workers have done in feeding the NHS workers, in housing the NHS workers, in housing the vulnerable, and in supporting their local communities through click and collect and food delivery, it's going to be a game changer in the way in which those workers and those jobs are viewed. Because, you know, no longer are you going to be able to say that they are low skill and low value. They've been the most valuable jobs throughout the whole of this crisis in keeping our economy going and keeping our communities going.
Yeah, definitely. It's been amazing to see the things that people have been doing whilst obviously they can't do what they normally do. So yeah, it has been amazing to see. You mentioned hotels and travel. What are your kind of thoughts on that? Because you know, that is really going to suffer. What sort of impact do you think not being able to travel globally potentially without a vaccine, or however it's going to work out, what effect will that have on our tourism and our hotels, do you think?
Well, I think, if you look at the spend of international tourists, that's about 30 to 40 billion in comparison to a total amount spent in hospitality domestically of about 100 billion. So the domestic tourist market, overnight market, business market, family visit market is always more significant in terms of economic contribution than the foreign tourism, albeit that foreign tourists are a vital export earner. The assessment is that you're going to see a decline in foreign travel and tourism of 55%, and we're going to lose about £11 billion. So that's a huge hit. That will take a long time to recover, because I think international and global travel will be more disrupted because of the sort of domino effect of coronavirus across the world markets. Chinese tourism may recover towards the end of this year, but American tourism and travel coming to the UK is going to take longer, as they take longer to come out the other side. There is therefore a huge opportunity for people to go out and support their domestic businesses and to have holidays and trips and travel in the UK. So I think, if we get it right and we have some support from government to transfer our marketing spend, or to increase our marketing spend from being outward focused to also talking to domestic consumers, encouraging them to take holidays and trips in the UK and to visit those businesses and use those businesses that have suffered throughout this closure period, then we have a chance of improving the outcome for the industry as a whole as we go towards the end of the year. But I think if you look at the financial crisis and how long it took for revenues to recover, it was about 2 years for that to fully unwind. Now, I think we will have a quicker recovery than that. But interestingly, in the hotel market, if you looked at sort of RevPAR, it took 2 years, but the profit margin took a further 2 years to fully recover in the UK. So I think that profit is a lagging indicator. And while you might sort of get occupancy boosts and a return to coming out, actually getting back that profitability and rebuilding profitability in those businesses is a sort of 2 year project, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a slow process, isn't it? Recovering and coming back.
It is. And I think, previously, if you've had previous economic shocks or previous terrorism events, they've been isolated for our particular market. This is a global crisis, and this is affecting consumers globally. So it will take time for consumer confidence to return. Even after the travel restrictions are lifted, I think a lot of people will be reluctant to travel. And also, as I say, there is this financial hit of all the markets across the world, that consumers will have less money. And simultaneously, our competitors, if we're looking at attracting foreign visitors, our competitors in Italy and France, Spain, Germany, they're also going to be promoting their markets to attract those high-spending foreign visitors back from China and America in particular. So we're going to be competing. We need to be proactive and on the front foot.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I've had a few emails about, I just wanted to have a quick chat with you about it, is no pub, no rent campaign. I don't know if you've seen that, but and so some, for people who are not aware, pub companies are still charging rent for pubs that are closed. I've got a list of ones that are doing that and ones that aren't. What would you kind of advise for kind of going forward for pub tenants and how they can get through this? I know that the pubs that are still charging have said that if they don't, it means losing their whole business and all of their employees. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that. If you have any advice.
Well, this is not unique to the pub sector. The situation is far more acute in restaurants and hotels, where we've actually seen less support from commercial and institutional landlords than we have seen from pubco landlords within the sector. But it is a conundrum that you've got a challenge here of rent and everybody in the chain needing to be paid. So I think it's about making sure the burden is shared equally, not all put down onto the tenant. And I think, one of the things we've been talking to government about is to make sure that there is a breathing space for commercial negotiations to happen, there is a principle of deferment. And actually what we need to do is to move towards a model like they've got in Germany, where effectively they pressed pause on all rent, all loans, all commercial debt, which also protects the landlord companies who've got big lending and obligations and big debts that they have to service, so that nobody can have enforcement against them for failing to make a payment in respect of rent. And Germany then proposed that that would be a 3 to 6 month period, depending how long the crisis lasted. You effectively press pause, and then when the economy has recovered and people are open again, you restart and you simply add on to the end of the lease or loan period the extra payments, so that the payment is always made. It's just a shift in cash flow. And then that's an issue for the tenant and the landlord to look at their cash flow and how they can do it. And landlords may well be able to support tenants through that period through a deferment of rent, which is what government proposed. Government proposed a 3 months deferment, but they did say the rent would remain due at the end of the period and the end of the process. And government also proposed a lease forfeiture moratorium. Now, what we need added to that is a debt enforcement moratorium, so that we can stop statutory demands and winding up petitions being lodged against, as I say, restaurants, hotels, pubs that are in commercial leases. My advice to tenants is to make sure you are talking to your landlord companies, because landlord companies are opting to do this on a case-by-case basis. And I think the dialogue and the period of negotiation needs to be taken forward by the lessee and the landlord to try and work out what is the solution that meets the needs and concerns of everybody. So the landlord can't pass everything down to the tenant and say, you need to pay the rent irrespective of your other outgoings, because they've obviously got no business and they're trying to prioritise their people. But equally, it's unrealistic to expect landlords wholly to bear the cost of that and to sort of simply write off vast swathes of rent. And that's across the whole of the commercial sector that I'm talking about. So I think this is on radar. They are looking at solutions. They are aware that this is an acute problem for hospitality businesses that are in distress. At the moment, we've got that 3 month deferment and sort of holiday that allows people to negotiate. We would urge both sides to use that negotiating period properly to make sure we get a solution that meets the needs of everybody.
Well, hopefully, we can come to a better arrangement for everybody, like you're saying, because I know that it's a real concern for people. So, and like you said, it's all about talking, and it's not fair for it all to fall on one particular person. So, absolutely,
and unless the government steps in to underwrite the costs of rent in the sector, I think it is always going to come down to that individual discussion. So, we had a discussion today with the communities department, and I've had a discussion with the business department as well about, as I say, the German model, which is pause, restart, and push it all further back. So you're not restarting with 2 quarters worth of debt hanging over you, but it's pushed back over time. And also the Danish model. Denmark has looked at this particular issue and said you can furlough a proportion of your property costs, and the government will underwrite the property costs, so that neither the landlord nor the lessee is bearing all of the costs of this. And that's a model that, again, could be looked at.
So there are obviously options for going forward. Just before I let you go, would it be possible to just clarify the grants, because I know some people have been paid, some people haven't been paid. I know it's with local councils. So are some councils just slower than others? Is that what the hold up is?
Yes, in a nutshell. The government made available the grants money to local authorities end of March, something like the 27th, 28th of March. And a lot of local authorities have been very slow off the mark to get that money paid to people. Some are being brilliant. The North East councils, I'm really proud, because that's my hometown of Durham. They were the quickest off the mark in getting those grants payable to everybody. And they've just written out and confirmed it with people rather than making them apply. Others, Dorset, Devon, South West, seem to be particularly slow. But they do seem to be coming through, and they do seem to have, for some of the councils, waited until their money has cleared from their bank accounts before they've paid it out. So I think if businesses haven't received those grants by the end of this week, then they need to get in touch with their local MP to make sure that pressure is put on. or get in touch with us and we'll put pressure on centrally. But I am on the case making sure that that is given, because that's such valuable emergency cash. And it really needs to go to every hospitality business, irrespective of rateable value. That's the quickest way of getting money to those businesses that are cash starved.
And in saying that, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, Kate, just if they're watching this?
We've got a dedicated coronavirus page on our website, so www.ukhospitality.org.uk/coronavirus, and there are general buttons there that you can contact us if you can't find the information on our site. The site's got lots of frequently asked questions, briefing notes, advice notes on everything from food handling, hygiene, to furloughing employees. But if there is a specific question that's missing, there's general contact details on that website. Or equally, if you've got a case study of what's happened because you haven't got a grant, or what's happened because you've had a loan refused, those are great, because that's what we need. What we really need now to get the government to do more is direct evidence of problems on the ground. So please let us know.
Brilliant. And I think it would be nice to finish on a positive. I know you mentioned it's been amazing to see what everyone's been doing, you know, feeding the NHS, helping those in isolation, the vulnerable. It must make you feel very proud to be part of this industry and represent this industry. But also, is there any other positives that have come out of this? Because it's always easy to focus on, you know, it is a terrifying time, it's awful, but it's sometimes it's nice to take a step back and look at the good things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's brought out the best of our industry, and things that we've all known instinctively that we do. The fact that there's a massive amount of volunteering and support for charities that often goes unsung. The fact that there's a huge amount of community spirit, and we are rooted in the communities in which we operate and want to do our best by them. The fact that we're one of the most collaborative industries that I've ever worked in. You know, people have, that's just been reinforced, and we've just been ourselves, but on steroids. So it's amazingly wonderful to hear all those stories. It makes me really proud and humbled to be the person who is the face of the industry to government, and it makes my job so much easier, because every time somebody does something and we celebrate it and sort of talk about hospitality heroes, it reinforces the fact that this industry is giving so much when it is on its knees, and therefore it's deserving of more government support. So every time that somebody does something silly, like a local authority delays payment or refuses payment or picks small holes in somebody's application for a loan, it just gives me the ability to go straight into ministers and say, can you please have a word with X, Y, and Z to make sure that they're doing the right thing by this industry who is doing the right thing by you. And that message has been received loud and clear, and it's been great to hear ministers at the daily press conferences celebrating our food heroes, celebrating our hotel heroes, talking up the industry and recognising the contribution it's making.
Brilliant. I mean, that's amazing to hear, and I'm sure everyone will definitely appreciate that is what's happening. So, well, thank you so much. It's really brilliant to chat to you. I've learnt a lot, and I'm sure that everyone else will as well. And yeah, thank you very much, and good luck with everything going forward.
No problem. Happy to help, and happy to come back on if you've got more questions from readers.
Thank you.